Chapter 1. A Stranger in the Dust. The town of Red Bluff lay still under the weight of a sinking sun, the sky bleeding crimson over the prairie. Dust swirled down the main street, where wagons had passed hours earlier, settling in the cracks of warp boards and the creaking porch of the saloon. From inside, the piano man stumbled over a tune while men laughed, cursed, and the clink of whiskey glasses echoed against the thin walls. Clara's boots crunched softly as she stepped into the open, her dress torn at the hem, her bonnet hanging loose from its ribbon. Her eyes darted like a frightened doe's, catching the shadow of every man who turned his head. She hugged her shawl tighter, but it did nothing to stop the tremor running through her hands. No one moved to help her. Folks kept themselves in Red Bluff. Trouble was a currency no one wanted to spend. A pair of cowhands leaned against a hitching post, chewing tobacco, pretending not to notice as she stumbled past. The street smelled of sweat, horse, and old whiskey. From across the way, Jack McGraw tipped his hat against the sun. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a dust-worn coat and a revolver slung low on his hip. He watched her. He had seen that kind of fear before, the kind that spoke of a soul hunted, not wandering. Clara's steps faltered near the saloon doors. A shadow shifted inside, a man's laughter too sharp, too knowing. She froze. Her lips parted, the whisper barely carrying on the dry wind. "Please, don't hurt me." Jack's boots sounded heavy as he crossed the street, spurs clinking with each step. The chatter from the saloon dipped for just a breath, long enough for everyone to notice. He stopped in front of her, lifting the brim of his hat to meet her wide, desperate eyes. "No one's going to lay a hand on you, miss," he said, his voice steady as oak. "Not while I'm standing here." Her breath caught, half relief, half disbelief. She stared at him, as though testing if he meant the words. Behind them, a drunk stumbled out of the saloon, eyeing Claire with a grin too sly to ignore. "Pretty things lost," the man slurred. Jack shifted, slow and deliberate, placing himself between her and the drunk. His hand hovered near the butt of his revolver, not drawn, but close enough to change the man's grin into a nervous cough. The drunk spat in the dust and shuffled back inside. Clara's knees weakened and she swayed. Jack reached out, steadying her with a touch light as a feather, though his hand was rough and calloused. "Name's Jack McGraw," he said, softer now. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Her eyes glistened in the fading light. For the first time since stepping into Red Bluff, she believed someone. The wind carried the cry of a coyote over the prairie, and the sun slipped lower, casting their shadows long across the dirt street. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Saloon. The saloon was alive with noise. Boots thumping on the warped floorboards, cards slapping against the scarred table, and the piano man pounding out a tune that fought against the hollers of half-drunk cowboys. The smoky air smelled of cheap whiskey, gun oil, and perfume strong enough to choke a horse. Jack pushed open the swinging doors, guiding Clara close to the side. Her fingers twisted the frayed edge of her shawl, her eyes flicking at every man who glanced their way. He felt her tremor through the space between them and shifted slightly, putting his frame between her and the room. "Keep your chin up, miss," he murmured without looking at her. "They'll sniff out fear quicker than coyotes." Clara lifted her chin, but her lips trembled, betraying the effort. The murmur of voices swelled, talk trailing after them as they made for a corner table. "That's McGraw, ain't it?" someone whispered near the bar. "Looks like he's picking up strays now." Another chuckled. Jack ignored them. He signaled the barkeep for 2 glasses, though he knew Clara wouldn't drink. She sat stiff as a post, her gaze darting toward the far end of the saloon where a card game was unraveling into loud curses. Jack leaned in, speaking low. "You're safer now, but you gotta tell me who's chasing you." Her hands clenched tighter. For a long moment, only the piano filled the silence between them. Then, in a voice no louder than the flick of a match, she said, My fiancé, he isn't the man he pretends to be. He's rich cruel. He thinks owning land means owning people too. Her throat worked as she swallowed. I ran. He'll come for me. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd heard whispers before about the baron east of the river, the one with money enough to buy men and no conscience to guide them. Now the shadow had a name, and it was sitting heavy across the table. Before he could answer, the saloon doors creaked again. A gust of night air swept in along with a tall man in a black duster. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room like a hawk hunting rabbit. They landed on Clara, and a thin smile curled beneath his mustache. Clara went pale. Her nails dug into the table. "That's one of his men," she hissed. The hired gun tipped his hat, slow, deliberate, before starting their way. Jack's hand slid toward his holster, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Stay behind me." The man's spurs clinked against the floor, the chatter in the saloon dying down as the crowd sensed a crackle of violence in the air. His hand twitched toward his coat. Jack moved faster. In a single fluid motion, his revolver cleared leather, barrel gleaming in lamplight. The click echoed like thunder across the saloon. "Don't," Jack warned. The hired gun froze, his smirk faltering under the weight of the cowboy's steady aim. For a tense heartbeat, no one breathed. Then, with a muttered curse, the man stepped back, disappearing into the smoky haze. Clara exhaled a shudder she'd been holding. Jack holstered his weapon, his eyes never leaving the shadows where the man had vanished. "Looks like your baron knows where to look," he said grimly. And this was just the beginning. Chapter 3. Secrets by the Campfire. The prairie stretched endless and quiet under a canopy of stars. Jack's ranch sat on the far edge of Red Bluff, miles from the nearest lantern glow. Tonight, the land felt more like a fortress than a home. The horses shifted in the corral, restless with the scent of strangers lingering in the wind. Jack set another log on the campfire, the flames crackling against the dry air. He offered Clara a tin cup of coffee, though he knew it was bitter as sin. She accepted it with trembling hands, more for warmth than taste. The firelight painted her face in soft gold, and for the first time, Jack noticed how the hardness in her eyes was built from fear, not cruelty. "You ride well enough for a woman who claims she's running," he said gently, breaking the silence. Clara kept her gaze on the flames. "When you've had to flee often enough, you learn to stay in the saddle." Her voice cracked at the edges. She took a sip, winced at the coffee, but held it close anyway. Jack leaned back against a fence post, one boot stretched toward the fire, the other resting ready beneath him. "You don't owe me your story," he said, his voice low and even, "but it might help me figure out how to keep you breathing." For a long time, all he heard was the whistle of coyotes and the restless stamp of hooves. Then Clara spoke, her words spilling slow, as if each cost her something. "My father promised me to him. The Baron said it would secure our family's land. But I didn't know the kind of man he was. I found out too late. He broke things just to watch me flinch. Broke people, too." Her knuckles whitened around the tin cup. "When he told me I'd bear him sons, whether I willed it or not, I ran." Jack's jaw hardened, the fire reflecting in his eyes. He wanted to draw his gun then and there, to ride east and end the man's cruelty. But instead, he reached forward, slow, steady, and set his rough hand lightly over hers. "You were right to run," he said, voice rough with conviction. "And you ain't alone anymore. Not while I'm breathing." Clara looked up at him, startled by the certainty in his tone. Tears welled, catching the firelight like tiny stars. Her lips trembled with a question she dared not ask. Jack brushed his thumb over her hand, gentle despite the calluses. "Not every man means you harm. Clara, you can trust me." The prairie wind carried the scent of sagebrush through the camp, and for a moment the world felt smaller, quieter. Just the two of them, bound by firelight and unspoken promises. She exhaled a shaky breath, and for the first time leaned closer to the warmth of his shoulder. Chapter 4. Blood on the Horizon. The morning broke red as rust, the sky painted in streaks that promised violence. Dust already stirred on the eastern ridge, rising like smoke. Jack stood on the porch of his ranch house, one hand resting on the rail, the other on the Colt at his hip. His jaw was tight, eyes narrowing at the cloud of riders approaching. "They're coming, aren't they?" Clara's voice was barely more than a whisper. She stood in the doorway, shawl clutched around her shoulders though the air was warm. Jack turned to her. The sight of her pale face, her lips pressed in with fear, struck him harder than the dust cloud ever could. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice steady, unflinching. "They're coming." About a dozen of them, maybe more. Clara stepped onto the porch, her hand find his arm as though she needed proof he was real. "We should leave. We can ride west, slip into the canyons. They won't catch us." Jack shook his head. "Run now, they'll just chase. Men like that don't stop till they've bled what they want. Better we stand." She searched his face, desperate, her eyes wet. "But you'll die." "I can't." He turned then, placing a calloused hand against her cheek. His thumb brushed away the tear before it could fall. "Listen to me. I'd rather die protecting you than live watching him take you back." His voice caught, low and rough. "You hear me, Clara? You're not his. You're safe with me." For a heartbeat, her breath shuddered. Then she leaned into his touch, eyes closing as if she could draw strength from his steadiness. A rider's horn echoed across the prairie, the sound sharp and cruel. The horses in the corral snorted and stamped. Jack glanced back toward the ridge. The silhouettes of armed men broke the horizon, the Baron's banner snapping in the wind. Jack turned toward his ranch hands who had gathered, rifles in hand, faces pale but resolute. "Take cover in the barn and the fence line. Don't waste a shot." The men nodded. Dust thickened as the riders drew closer. Clara clung to his sleeve. "If you stay out there, he'll kill you." Jack bent low, pressing his forehead briefly to hers. "If he does, I'll go knowing I kept my word." He kissed her then, swift, burning, final as a brand. When he pulled away, her eyes were wide, her lips parted. The sun was sinking low, casting the riders in blood-red light. Jack mounted his horse, the leather creaking beneath him. His voice carried like iron across the ranch yard. "Hold steady, boys. Tonight we fight for more than land. We fight for what's right." The riders thundered closer, dust boiling around them. Clara stood on the porch, her hands trembling, watching the man who had promised to protect her ride toward a storm of gunfire. Chapter 5. The gunfight at dawn. The dawn broke hard and cold, the prairie drenched in a pale light that turned the horizon silver. Smoke from last night's fires still clung to the ranch yard, curling around the broken fence posts and spent shells. Jack stood in the dirt. Dust streaked across his face, his revolver heavy in his hand. Across from him, the Baron's riders fanned out, a black tide of men on restless horses. Clara watched from the porch, heart hammering against her ribs. Every shot fired, so far it felt like it tore through her own body. She clutched the rifle Jack had pressed into her hands before the fight began, her fingers slick with sweat. She had never fired one before, but she swore she would have meant saving him. The Baron himself dismounted, his boots sinking into the dust. He was broad, dressed in a dark vest and silk cravat that looked more suited for a parlor than the battlefield. His eyes, cold and merciless, found Clara, and his lips curved in a cruel smile. "You've made a mess of things, McGraw," he called, his voice carrying on a morning wind. "The girl is mine. Hand her over, and I'll let you keep your land." Jack spat into the dirt. "She ain't yours. Never was. You want her, you'll have to kill me." The men around the Baron shifted, hands twitching near their holsters. Tension crackled like lightning in the still air. The Baron sneered. Then so be it. It happened fast. Guns clearing leather, muzzle flashes brightened the dawn. The ranch yard erupted in chaos. Men shouted, horses screamed, bullets tore through the corral. Jack fired, his Colt bucking his hand, each shot deliberate, precise. One rider fell, then another. Clara pressed a rifle to her shoulder, teeth clenched. When one of the Baron's men broke past the line, charging toward Jack with a pistol raised, Clara squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, the recoil slamming her back, but the man tumbled from his saddle. Smoke burned her lungs, but she didn't care. She had saved him. Jack spared her a glance, pride flashing in his eyes even as he reloaded. "Good girl!" he shouted over the din. At last, only the Baron remained, standing tall amid the wreckage, his pistol trained on Jack. Their eyes locked. Two men cut from different cloth, bound for this moment. The Baron fired first, but Jack was faster. His shot cracked through the morning air, striking true. The Baron staggered. Disbelief etched across his face before he collapsed into the dust. Silence followed, broken only by the groans of wounded men and the lonely cry of a crow overhead. Jack lowered his Colt, his chest heaving. Clara dropped the rifle, rushing toward him, skirts tangling around her legs. She threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his dust-stained shirt. "You're alive!" she gasped. Jack held her tight, burying his face in her hair. "Told you, Clara," he whispered, his voice rough but certain. "I'll protect you. Always." The rising sun cast them in gold, lighting their embrace amid the smoke and ruin, a promise sealed in the aftermath of battle. V Chapter 6, Love Among the Ruins. By afternoon, the dust had settled over Red Bluff. The once proud banners of the Baron's men lay trampled in the dirt, their riders scattered or gone. The ranch bore scars of the fight. Fences splintered, windows shattered, bullet holes pocked into the barn walls. But it still stood, and so did Jack. Clara moved through the yard, helping where she could. She bound a ranch hand's wounded arm with strips of linen torn from her skirt, fetched water for the horses, and soothed frightened children who'd hidden in the loft during the battle. Her hands shook, but her heart beat steady, no longer hollow with fear. She had faced death, pulled a trigger, and survived. At dusk, the townfolk gathered at the ranch. Some had come to gawk, others to lend help, but all wore the same expression: respect for the man who had stood against the Baron and won. Jack greeted them briefly, but his eyes never strayed far from Clara. When the crowd thinned, he found her standing at the porch, gazing out at the prairie where the sun sank low, painting the horizon in hues of fire and rose. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying with it the scent of sage and smoke. "You fixed more than a few souls today," Jack said quietly as he joined her. "Not just mine." Clara looked up at him, her eyes bright with the reflection of twilight. "I was so afraid, Jack. I thought I'd lose you." Her voice trembled, but there was strength in it too. "But you stayed. You fought for me." He reached out, taking her hands in his, rough palms enveloping her delicate fingers. "I told you before, Clara, you're not alone anymore. You'll never be alone, not as long as I draw breath." Her throat tightened and tears welled, though this time they were born of relief. She leaned into him, pressing her forehead to his chest. The steady rhythm of his heart, the warmth of his arms, was more powerful than any promise spoken. "Please," she whispered, her words trembling against him, "don't let me go." Jack tilted her chin up with gentle fingers, his eyes steady as the mountains. "I'll protect you, always." Their lips met beneath the glow of the setting sun, a kiss both tender and fierce, sealing every vow they had spoken in the heat of danger. Behind them, The ranch creaked and settled like a wounded beast, but was alive. Around them, the prairie stretched endless, whispering of tomorrow. For the first time, Clara didn't feel like a stranger in the dust. She felt like she'd found home. Together, they stood as the last light faded, their silhouettes etched against the burning horizon. Two souls bound not by fear, but by love, forged in fire and made unbreakable. The sun sank low over the plains, bleeding gold and crimson across the endless horizon. Wind stirred the sagebrush, carrying the faint sounds of saloon music from Red Bluff, softened by distance. The ranch, scarred but standing, cast long shadows across the dirt yard where horses stamped and snorted, restless with the scent of gunpowder still clinging to the air. Jack threw his arm around Clara, both of them dust-stained and weary, yet neither willing to step apart. The Baron was gone, his men scattered, and for the first time since she fled into the desert, Clara's shoulders eased. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, stronger than any promise. He tipped her chin up, his eyes dark with tenderness. You came here afraid, thinking the world only meant to hurt you. But I swear, Clara, as long as I draw breath, you'll never be alone again. Her lips trembled into a smile as tears welled bright. And I'll never run again, not from you. You're my home now, Jack. The wind rose, tossing her hair across her face, and he kissed her with the last light of day burning around them. The horizon glowed like a forge, framing two figures who had fought and bled and chosen each other against all odds. As the first stars winked above the prairie, they stood together, no longer a stranger and a cowboy, just a man and a woman who had found love in the dust, bound forever by the fire of the West.